So thank you everyone for joining us for this session today on demonstrating your English proficiency for college applications abroad. And joining us for this session, we have John Nesbitt from the Duolingo English Test team. All of you would already know or should know this, that demonstrating English proficiency is an integral part of your college applications, right? Most of you are from CBSE or ICSE or state board. You need to have an English proficiency test, which colleges could see to understand that you are ready to with the college level English. In this session, John will help us learn more about Duolingo English Test, that is DET, which is accepted by over 3,000 colleges and institutions across the world, and is also the most convenient, fastest, and the most affordable English proficiency test out there. And before we get going, let me briefly introduce John to all of you. John is the Strategic Engagement Manager for Duolingo English Test, DET. Prior to joining this EdTech startup in 2018, he worked for his alma mater, that is Vanderbilt University, where he worked for 12 years and was the co-chair of International Admissions Enrollment Management. So he can provide you a great perspective from the admissions point of view as well. He has traveled extensively to Asia, Europe, Middle East, South America, and of course, India for 5 years. For the last 6 years, John served and volunteered on the Council of International Schools, that is CIS, where he led the tours, college tours in North Europe, Turkey, Eurasia, and the Middle East. He has his bachelor's and master's degree from Vanderbilt, and he has a deep understanding of international admissions. And John was drawn to the innovation and accessibility of the Duolingo English Test. So it's a pleasure to have you here, John. And before we get going with the session, a couple of very quick announcements. First is, of course, that this session is being recorded. And second is that all the sessions that we're doing today, yesterday, all of these will be available on our YouTube channel. So with that, let me pass it over to John. John, over to you.
Devesh, thank you so much. And thank you for joining me today, students around India. Wonderful to see you all here and learn a little bit more about the Duolingo English Test. No need to introduce myself with that wonderful introduction from Devesh. So thank you so much. So as he mentioned, we're going to give you a little overview today of kind of how the English tests proficiency scores are used and why they're needed in the process, kind of how it works, the importance of it and the policies around it. So what you might expect to see from universities, specifically in the US, and what they're going to be looking for. A little bit about the landscape today, and then just a brief overview of the Duolingo English Test. So let's get into the importance of English testing in the admissions process. So unlike the UK or Canada, visa and immigration has nothing to do with English proficiency in the United States. So if you're looking at schools outside of the US, that's wonderful. I applaud that, but do know that there are just some different rules, regulations, and processes. So when it comes to English proficiency inside of the United States and the model of admissions for colleges and universities there is no direct link between we're going to accept this student from India and now we need some sort of government confirmation through immigration and visa services or anything like that. So it's a little bit different. And so it's up to the university to understand and to set their own standards of what's going to be admissible or what's going to be required. It's going to be there as really a tool to ensure that any international student that's coming, not only will they be able to integrate into the social community and the fabric of the campus, but of course that they can thrive academically. So if you're, I'll use the DET as an example. If you're somewhere in the 80s, 90s, maybe a little bit lower than maybe a C1 level, then maybe going to a school that's going to require that you might not be a good fit just because of some of the English being spoken. In some cases, for some universities, again, maybe you're on a little bit of the lower end of the scale, you're looking for a first-year ESL, an English program, foundation year, or an into pathway program. Maybe you're looking at community colleges or 2-year programs before you transfer in. Sometimes in those cases, it could be used as a placement option. So you've scored exactly this. We're going to put you into the second semester of English, and then you only need to do that for maybe a semester, let's say. At the opposite end of the spectrum, at the most selective, the most kind of highly sought after universities that have admit rates, 5, 10%, or even smaller. So very, very selective universities. This score is really much more seen as a minimum. It's a yes, no. And so, in few cases will universities really get into specifically what your score was and kind of overanalyze it. In many cases, it's kind of seen as a check mark. You're either going to be okay with your English or you're not. And if you're not, then we might get in as admissions offices and admissions officers. They might then get more into your essays, your grades, your curriculum, interviews, maybe what else might be in the file to make sure that your English is going to be there. In some cases, whether your English proficiency score was maybe borderline or just below, or just in addition to having a good English score, some universities out there will require an interview of some kind, whether that's meeting virtually with alumni in your country or area, with an admissions officer, or even a tour guide or senior student at the campus. Other universities might use Vericant or an initial view, or even in some cases allow the Duolingo English tests with the interview section at the end of it to count. So many different ways that you're seeing it, and why it's going to be so important on your profile is that in many ways it's a yes, no. You have to have this. You have to be able to prove that you're going to be able to handle the English and be able to be a successful student. Reminder of kind of what and how it fits into the application process in general. And so if this is the first time seeing this, wonderful. I'll spend a little time on it. If you've seen this a whole lot, you know a lot about it. But generally speaking, when you're applying to schools in the United States, there's two sections of what you're submitting. There's the academic side, which is often, more quantitative. Things like CBSEs, your ICSEs, your IBs, your transcript, anything that is academic in nature, right? Numbers based, your SAT or ACT, another number if it's required. We'll talk about those trends going test optional in a moment. Another number that universities will see will be an English proficiency score. So a DET, a TOEFL, an IELTS, a PTE, whatever might be required by the university. And so these are number-based things. On the other side is more of your personal, more qualitative, what you've spent your time doing, your essays, your short answers, your recommendation letters, anything else that might be encompassed in the application. And so where this fits in, again, it is more number-based. And of course, as we know, when things are more number-based, it's going to be often I either have this or I don't, which I was kind of saying a second ago. And so really crucial. This is, again, so important for them to understand that you'll be able to not just thrive academically, but really thrive socially as well and have the full college experience. It comes kind of part and parcel with what's consistency in the application. And so when an admissions officer is looking across all your grades, everything you have in your application, consistency is really important. And so another thing that universities will do is look in lieu of test scores or with the test scores, if you've got them, and with your academics, your CV or your transcript, along with that to kind of make sure that everything's consistent. Universities are going to be maybe a little surprised to see if someone has absolutely the highest grades possible, but a really low English testing or really low testing scores and vice versa. So generally speaking, we want to make sure it all makes sense and that someone's in the similar level. So if you're at a really high level with your English test, we'd expect you to see maybe a higher level as well with your grades or your tests as well. But that would all line up into a more coherent decision. The policies that you'll see across the board at universities, you'll see a couple different. One, you'll see a minimum score at our university is fill in the blank. You'll often hear for the Duolingo English test, like a 120 for more selective schools, or you'll hear 100 or 110. Another one you'll see is applicants who succeed here typically score above, again, fill in the blank. I know some schools will say applicants who succeed here typically score above 120. So they're kind of tipping their hand saying 120 is probably the minimum, but they're also letting you know that they don't have a firm and fast, you absolutely have to score above that. They're just telling you it's a selective process and the best applicants normally have around that number or above. There also might be a test waiver policy. So you might be delighted to find out that there are some universities out there that based off of where you're coming from and the schooling that you've already received, you don't actually need to take any sort of English proficiency test. So this in many ways benefits students like yourself from India. If you've been in an English medium curriculum, so if your schooling has been English, first language, English, and every class is taught in English, then in many cases across the board in the United States, you won't even have to take an English proficiency score. That might not mean that you still don't take one. You might say, wonderful, I know I have all that, but I'd like to still have a good number to show them. I'd like to also have the video interview or the writing samples that come with it. But do know it would behoove you to take a few moments and look out there, all the schools you're applying to, how many of them actually need it? Chances are you're going to run across your list of 10 schools that one of them or two of them will still need it. So you're probably still going to take it. But do know that option is out there. And some students are always very delighted and surprised to find there's one less thing you need to do. Subscores are across all tests, the Duolingo test, the TOEFL, the IELTS, whatever test you're taking, subscores are often a part of that test. And so some universities will actually have minimum policies that would say, I need to see 120 on the Duolingo English test, and every subscore needs to have at least 100 or above. So read the fine print, go online to these schools' websites, make sure you truly understand before you hit submit. Did my score satisfy what they needed? Not only the overall score, but also the subscores. If the answer is yes, submit your score and you should be done with English proficiency. It probably shouldn't come up again. There is the rare case where an admissions office might get to February when they're making decisions and they see that your first score you submitted was good and right on the line or just above it, but they maybe want more information. And so some schools might reach back out and say, hey, we'd love to see one more test from you, or we'd love to see just one more sample from you. And so you might get an email from some schools that are coming to you late in the game. So that could always be an option. But more than likely, close to perfect scores don't help you as much as a close to a perfect SAT or ACT. So again, because of the nature, it's not the higher up you are, the more aptitude you might show, and we might have more scholarships. At a place like Vanderbilt University that would be looking for like a 120, 125 on the DET, if you get a 145, it's not like you're more likely to be admitted. Or if they needed 100 on the TOEFL and you got a 112, it doesn't mean you're now in this pool. It's okay, we have some students way up here. Because again, at those more selective places, it's the student first. So academic student first, your English is more about making sure you have it. Here's some examples of what you might see at some universities. So these are just pulled directly from the websites of what you see. And so here's Barnard, wonderful women's college in New York, right near Columbia. And they actually have a policy here where they can have an SAT or an ACT. You can see as far as what's needed there. And then as the English proficiency, you can have a TOEFL, an IELTS, or a Duolingo English test. Or they can indicate as a student that English is your first language, one of the things I was talking about, or if you've attended an English school for 4 years. And so if your final schooling has been all in English, then in Barnard's case, you don't need to take one. Here's another example, Northeastern University in Boston. And they have a little bit more detail. And this is kind of a really good example, because oftentimes you'll see a few sentences, not just a straight black and white, but maybe some conditions. And so a lot of different, right? Here you go. The ranges provided below represent the middle 50% of who were admitted and enrolled. And so there you can see a middle 50% for the Duolingo at Northeastern is a 120 to 130. So they're giving you a range. They're not even giving you a minimum. So many different ways you can see the policies that are going to be needed. Moving on, there's some really interesting trends in English proficiency. And so the biggest one last year was that the test optional trend, which I'm sure you're all aware of and delighted that it exists, has really just kept the momentum going. And so we're seeing thousands of schools across the US now that don't need an SAT, do not need an ACT. And for many of you, hopefully you're celebrating right now in your room, because that is good news. For those of you who really enjoyed that part of the process, maybe you already took it once or twice, and that was something that was a strength in your portfolio, don't worry. Just because it's not required doesn't mean that you can't submit it. So you can always still show it. But as a result, when an admissions office in the US is looking at students from around the world, something like an SAT or an ACT has its place in some cases because it is a little bit of a standard measurement. It's one ruler, right? We understand across the board, there are many flaws with those tests, of course, but it gives you some idea, right? Same thing why universities want to see your transcripts and want to see your grades, because that is another system around the world. We know what an IB score or CBSE means. And so that's why those matter. So as you can imagine, if your application now, you just removed basically half of the quantitative side, and now there is no ACT to see in addition to your wonderful scores and your A stars, Well, then now a number like an English proficiency score is going to maybe lend a little bit more weight and credibility. And so something in that case, now we can see not only your English, but we can see some other aspects of your application as well. And I think also COVID-19 has just showed the immense need for a secure online test. And so we saw a huge increase at the Duolingo English test, but also TOEFL and IELTS launched at-home tests, and Essentials will launch later this summer. And so I think you're seeing those other organizations kind of starting to maybe come to us. We luckily weren't doing this just last year. We've been doing this for over 5 years. And so we had a really good runway to not only launch, but also really perfect what is a secure online test. And here are some options as far as when you're looking to add that English proficiency test to your profile, to your resume as you're going off to apply to college. Here are some of the options. Again, big caveat here because every school out there is different. Some schools might take all of these tests, some might only take 1 or 2, some might have a different policy on it. But as far as how we compare, we're going to be the most affordable option, as Devesh mentioned earlier. You take it, again, it's unlimited, it's a fast test, it's a little bit shorter in that regard. The turnaround time is very quick. So whether you are taking it now in your final year and you're not going to submit it off to schools until later this fall, or you are taking it at the last minute, which we don't recommend, but you are taking it on December 30th, 2 days before the deadline, do know it's always a fast turnaround time. And last but not least, it is unlimited shares as well. So we're not going to continue to charge you or look for more funds. In many cases, students are taking the test for free already. One of the big differences for Duolingo is that we're the only major testing company that has an access program. So we're giving away free tests every year. Last year, over 10,000 free tests. So I know that Devesh and Next Genius have some, but also universities around the world have these free vouchers. And so if you're looking to apply to Barnard, as I mentioned earlier, well, then reach out to Ruby and see if there's some free testing vouchers. And we work in support of those universities to make sure that there's lots of free tests out there. And then last but not least, understanding kind of those scores across the board. What does a TOEFL 100 or an IELTS 7.5 equate to? And I also added the Common European Framework of Reference, the CEFR, a much more international scale. So you might be familiar with that. That equates to around a C1 or up, which again, for the Duolingo English test would be about a 120 and up. So just briefly wanted to educate you quickly on the Duolingo English test. Some of you might know the app. Of course, the mission there is to provide free education for all. So maybe some of you even use the app or have friends or family members who do. Similarly, our test is designed to use technology to lower barriers and increase access and opportunities. As Devesh mentioned, that was the #1 reason why I was drawn to the company to join and start working with it. Traditional testings, options, you need to take an English test, you find out, you go to sign up, you book a date. In the case of our founder, Luis, who's an international student from Guatemala originally, he went to sign up for the test and there was nothing available in his country for months. And so he had to travel to another country to take the test. And then of course you go to the center, in this case, maybe even a different city or country, and then you certify 3 hours later, a couple weeks later, a couple $100 later, not to mention the stress and everything of traveling around to do all that. Where of course what we offer is accessible, taken in over 200 countries at only $49. We mentioned today on the question before getting started to know where you are located. And it was exciting to hear that many of you are outside of tier 1 cities, very emblematic of who we are as an organization in India. There are 100 cities in India with testing centers, 100 cities. And last year we had DET test takers in over 1,000 different cities. And so when we talk about access and really anywhere you are, you can take our test. Comprehensive test, again, it's fast, reliable, and of course, very secure. So for the Duolingo test, you need to take a test, you figure it out, you can take that test right now. You're really excited about the DET, you can finish up this call in a few moments and log on and take it within the end of the hour. You'll spend about an hour taking the test. You need to be the only person in your room. You can have no technology, no pen, no pad, nothing, just the computer with the forward-facing camera. And of course, you'll save all that time, money, and undue stress by not traveling to a testing center. And last but not least, we want to make sure you test your best. So whether you're taking a TOEFL or an IELTS or whatever you're taking, in regards to how you're building your profile, you need to make sure you spend some time. preparing, because again, as we mentioned, these universities are going to see these scores and they're going to use these scores. And so you want to make sure it is your best. In the example of the Duolingo English test, in addition to the test itself, you get that one video interview, which is about 3 minutes, and you get the one writing sample, which is about 3 to 5 minutes in time. So these are chances, again, for you to do your own work, write your own paragraph and put out your own statement on a topic, and universities will actually watch these. Not every single one of them, right? Places like UCLA or Northeastern with hundreds of thousands of applications, probably not. But smaller places, maybe your Rollins, your Chapman, Barnard, other places like that. I know at Vanderbilt, we would sometimes watch those interviews. They were really helpful because it's another chance for you to hear the person speaking. It's kind of an addition to this gut check, but it's also a chance for an admissions officer to add more context to your file. What happens when admissions officers are reading your file is they're writing down notes. They're adding some different things. What are the big pros here for your application? What are the things you've excelled at? And if you give a wonderful video interview in a DET and they're listening, they're going to add in those comments as well. And so it's all part and parcel. But as far as preparing and testing your best, what we offer at the DET is a free practice guide. It's about 80 pages. Just go online, download it, completely free. It will give you all the tips and strategies you need. And then we also have unlimited free practice tests. If you have any additional questions moving forward outside of the remaining time we have today, you can go online for a really brilliant FAQ that has interactive videos showing you how to do things like ship your scores off to universities or more, as well as we offer around the clock 24/7 support. So if you have questions, you can always go online to our website and actually just speak to someone, which is really helpful. And one final note I'll say is if you are going through the Duolingo English test, and you run into a power outage or blackout issue or Wi-Fi drops, and in the middle of the test, you lose it, go check your email that you registered for. They'll have a troubleshooting email with instructions of what to do, but also with another voucher to make sure that you don't pay for the test again. And you can take it and actually have a full certifiable results. So that's all for me as far as the importance of English in the profile and applying to colleges. Devesh, over to you for a little Q&A.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, John. That was wonderful. I'm a big fan of Duolingo and the work that the Duolingo team is doing. Let me just add that all Next Genius Scholarship Program partner colleges except DET. That means if you want to demonstrate your English proficiency to any Next Genius college, you can take the DET. And we have posted the link to sign up for DET in the chat box. And as John mentioned few moments ago, that in the absence of testing, in the absence of SAT, ACT, a lot of colleges have started looking at DET as an alternative to the test that you could not take, right? So that is another addition, to your profile when you are applying to colleges. How is Duolingo able to do all of this? Well, they are building some tremendous technology, and yeah, I think John, maybe you can answer that. Like, how is Duolingo so special and so different than the other tests, and how are you able to do so lot at such a small cost to the test takers?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. And, probably we could do a full 45 minutes and we could bring in an expert from our company to tell you a little bit more. But I think there's a couple factors. One is that with the mission in mind of how we were built to be a solution to problems we didn't even know existed yet, right? Back in 2015 and 2016, when we're designing this test, we knew at the time, just because of our founders' experience, that there was a real gap and a real space for us that didn't exist, an affordable, accessible option. And so I think that a lot of it comes from that. We were designing it to be an online solution, and many things have to come into play. And when we mentioned access being a crucial part of who the Duolingo English test is, and so when you talk about the test being a little bit shorter, certainly we could have had our test be 3-4 hours time. But again, when you're thinking with access at the front of your mind, internet access, Wi-Fi availability, when you're in a remote place around the world, you might not be able to sit through a 3-hour test with good Wi-Fi. It might not work. And so kind of everything we're doing is through that initial lens of how could it be the most accessible and at the same time, the most efficient and the most affordable. And so there's a whole lot going on, but so much of it uses artificial intelligence from end to end. And what we mean by end to end is from the item type developments, which of course always goes hand in hand with humans, but a lot of the initial work can be done, to the grading, to the test design, to the adaptive nature of the test. And so one thing I didn't get a chance to spend a moment on, but is a big part of the answer here, is that it's an adaptive test. And so if we all right now, all 77 of us, stop this call and go online to start taking a test, we're going to have different experiences, not only because of how the test works in nature, but also because of what an adaptive test does. So it will figure out, Devesh, how you're doing the first couple minutes of the test and say, wow, Devesh has a really strong English skill set. I think he might be up in the 120s, 130s, 140s. Let's give him some questions up here. He keeps getting them right. Maybe he's above that. Okay, he didn't get all those right. Let's bring it down a little bit. And so if you're looking at a graph of the level of difficulty, it's up and down. I had a student yesterday, I was doing a webinar with students in Tunisia, and they asked a great question about, I took a practice test and there were really a whole lot of words I didn't understand and it seemed very hard. And is this only for highest level of English? And the answer is no, it's for any student of any caliber. That's a practice test example, but what it's going to do is adapt to you. And so if you feel like the first couple minutes are very hard, guess what? The rest of the test won't feel like that. And if you feel like the first couple minutes are really easy and you're like, this is the simplest thing I've ever taken, hold on, it's about to get a whole lot harder once it figures out exactly your ability. So those, for many reasons, kind of how it works. But I think utilizing technology and harnessing that, what we had as a company before we launched our tests, definitely helps to have some engineering expertise.
Fantastic. Thank you for answering that. And I have a couple of questions where people are asking, what is the best time to take the test? Which grade? When should they be taking this test?
This is a wonderful question, and a lot depends on your level and comfort of English. And so if you were in that bucket of students I mentioned earlier who maybe have had English in your school throughout everything you've done, or even just the last few years, you might feel fully comfortable. And other than spending a few minutes taking some practice tests, which again are completely free, so make sure you do a couple of those. Whether you're completely fluent in English or not, take that practice test, because you just want to get familiar with the types of questions, that there's a clock in the top corner. Every aspect of being in an online test might be new for you. You're a little younger, so maybe not. Maybe you've already been doing some of these types of things, but it's really crucial and vital just to understand, what is a test like? But as far as grade level, if you're ready, you could take it as grade 11 or even grade 10. Do know the test is only valid for 2 years. So you'll want to keep that in mind with when you're applying. What we see, the majority of students are taking it in the summer before their final year, or up through those next couple months. As far as time of day, we see about half of our students taking it in the morning, another third taking it, or a little bit more than that, taking it in the afternoon, and then just under a fourth or so taking it from 6 to midnight or so. Totally your call. Again, all designed to remove or reduce test taker anxiety. So if you're a morning person, take it then. Evening, take it then. Completely your call. Get your cup of tea ready. Make sure that room is you alone, nothing else in it but that laptop, and then you're good to go.
Fantastic. We are almost coming to the end of the session. And before we end, I just want to ask one more question. And to all the questions, remaining questions, please check out the link that is there, Duolingo, English Test or duolingo.com/FAQ, or just feel free to write to the email ID that is provided. Maybe you can take a screenshot of that and then write to them. My final question to you, John, is are the universities able to see the interviews too? Like when the students send their scores to the universities, do they see the interviews and all?
They sure do. Yeah, I'm really glad you asked that. And what a great question to finish on. For everyone out there who's going to take a DET, make sure you know when you get to the interview, the video and the writing sample, that's just not a throwaway. It's not just something we're asking at the end. That's live, that's recorded, and universities will see those interviews and they will have access to the interview as well as the writing sample. So make sure you take your time on that. Really think about what you want to say, what you want to put out there. And in many cases, it can be used by the admissions offices, and it's really, really good and helpful for them. So yes, definitely take your time on those.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, John, for sharing all the information with us today. And thank you for joining us very early on the Saturday morning. It's a pleasure having you here, and it's always great to learn how differently DET is doing all the stuff to increase the accessibility, not just for the English testing, but also increasing the accessibility for colleges for the students. Once again, thank you so much, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you. My pleasure to spend some time with you here on this morning, and best of luck to all the students out there with your journey and your process. Have a good day.